You think you know the Black Americans that they sent to colonize Liberia? Well, you don't. In this video, I'm gonna break down exactly who they were. So let's get into it. Why did they send so many American Indians to Liberia? I know you're thinking, but they didn't send the Native Americans to Liberia. They sent the Africans back to Africa. Well, what if I told you that the first president, also known as the father of Liberia, Joseph Jenkins Robert, is not who you think he is? Did you ever hear about the Curtis family? They are documented as a family of Cherokee Indians who colonized Liberia. So in school and through media, we're taught that these first families of Virginia held only African enslaved people. Anytime you speak to anybody Black, they say, I'm African. They think all their ancestors came directly from Africa. But if you look at the documentation, it tells a different story. And to understand that story, we must go back to Jamestown, the Doeg Indians, and Bacon's Rebellion. So Bacon's Rebellion came to a head in the year 1676, and it was a conflict between Nathaniel Bacon and Sir William Berkeley. Long story short, these two colonists disagreed on how to run the Virginia colony, and that led to an uprising. Nathaniel Bacon's followers revolted against the upper class, Sir William Berkeley. The ironic thing about this is that these two men were in fact cousins through marriage. So really, Bacon's Rebellion was just a power struggle. But the people really affected by this were the American Indians, and in particular the Doeg Indians. You see, Nathaniel Bacon wanted Sir William Berkeley to press the English king to bring in military force to stop the American Indians from attacking the colonists. As the colonists encroached on American Indian territory, of course the American Indians fought back. I mean, it's their land. What did they expect? So through documentation we have as early as 1640, there were probably only 150 African enslaved people in Virginia, as they told it. Remember, 20-odd something arrived in 1619 on the ship the White Lion. And when you look at slavevoyage.com, you can see most of these people that were coming to Virginia at this time from other places in the Americas. These people were not from Africa. They were American Indians. Now let's get into documentation, because I know a lot of you are not trusting this information, and that's okay, because it's not what you learned, it's not what you were told. And you're proud to be Black. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. Yes, you could be Black and have American Indian ancestry. Can you believe it? Well, you better, because it's true. So Robert J. Miller, who's a professor at Arizona State University, said in the Virginia colony, it is a fact that the first slaves of the English settlers were the local Indian peoples, and then large numbers of Indians captured elsewhere and transported to Virginia to serve as slaves on those plantations. So that's why you see in the slave voyages that many of these enslaved people were coming from other places in the Americas and being shipped to Virginia. We know that the Mayans were also enslaved and shipped to different areas across the Americas, including Virginia. Then you have the indigenous people of the Bahamas. They were enslaved to the point where their population was completely depleted from the island, wiped out. So you have all these American people from different nations being shipped to different colonies, including in Europe and in Africa. So right after Bacon's Rebellion, the colonists doubled down on enslaving American Indians. It reads in 1677, 1679, 1681, and 1682, the Virginia Assembly renewed the acts declaring the legitimacy of Indian enslavement. The 1681 and 1682 acts deregulated and opened up an expansive Indian trade and even reinstated Nathaniel Bacon's law from 1676. All plunder, either Indians or otherwise, taken by his followers were the spoils of war and were lawfully booty. Everett argues that this demonstrated the legality of enslaving Indians captured in war and authorized the seizure of any Indian deemed hostile to Virginia. In fact, Morgan states that Henrico County alone, located just north of Richmond, Virginia today, in the year 1683, get ready for this, 8,433 Indian children were enslaved. Ages from 4 to 18 were registered at the county court. That same year, not one African enslaved child was registered. So there were 8,433 enslaved Indians in Henrico County alone. Not one was African. So now that we know that all the European colonists participated in enslaving American Indians, let's get into the exact families and the names of these families and their descendants that you know today that enslaved American Indians. So we have Captain William Randolph. Here's his Indian servant. He enslaved many American Indian people. That's Thomas Jefferson's ancestor. That is Edward Norton's ancestor. You have the Farrar family. That's Neil Patrick Harris's family. He's a descendant of that family. You have the Koch family, connected to the Washingtons, connected to the Madisons. We have the Taylor family. We have the Tallow family. We have the Taliaferro family. Those are the ancestors of Hilary Duff and Glenn Close. And the list just goes on and on and on. These are the ancestors of many celebrities that you see today. But I would like to focus on two families in particular, and that's the Harrisons and the Byrds. And the reason why I'm focusing on these two families is because they're connected to the first president of Liberia, the Roberts family. So let's paint the picture of the climate Joseph Jenkins Roberts was born into. In 1683, while serving as treaty negotiator for Virginia, William Byrd insisted that the Seneca Nation return an Indian girl and 3 Appomattox Indian enslaved boys who had been taken from Englishmen's homes. Byrd demanded that the Seneca deliver up all Christian, Indian, or Negro servants and slaves that were amongst you that had been carried away from the English masters in Virginia. So he's demanding that they return their own people back to the English colonists. What? In 1686, Colonel Byrd also suffered several Indian losses from his own plantation. Everett asserts that Byrd, who made his fame and fortune establishing the settlement that became Richmond and by engaging in the African slave trade, got his start enslaving in 1671 by leading trading expeditions of the southwest of Virginia, which meant that he was involved in transporting humans, Indians. He was also selling Indians to his neighbors as early as 1673, which we have here. And in 1680, the Council President Nicholas Spencer, that's Princess Diana's cousin, referred to Byrd as one of the Indian traders, another word for someone who sells Indian people. And another person referred to Byrd as bringing away women and children captives. So there's a lot of documentation that William Byrd was very, very, very active in enslaving American Indians. How did the mass media miss this? This is one of the most famous people of the American colonies. One of his descendants is Louis de Bourbon, the pretender to the French and Spanish thrones today. Moreover, William Byrd's son, William Byrd II, still held Indian slaves more than a quarter of a century later. So it's not like they held them for 2 seconds. It's not like they held them for 3 days. They enslaved these people for generations. So now I want to speak about the Harrison family. The Harrison family, just like the Byrds, were very active in enslaving American Indians. And they have a major case against the Harrison family that was published all over the colonies in every newspaper with a particular descendant of one of the American Indians who fought for their freedom. So the Harrison family and their extended family all enslaved American Indians. Jane Gibson the Elder was one of these enslaved American Indians on the Harrison plantation, and her descendants sued for their freedom based off of Virginia law enacted in the late 1800s, stating that anyone born to a free Indian woman was also free. So Jane Gibson's descendants sued. Some of them won. Others remained enslaved. So how does this all relate to the first president of Liberia, Joseph Jenkins Roberts? Well, Joseph Jenkins Roberts' father, James Roberts, was involved in a shipping business named Roberts, Colson and Company. While we don't know exactly who enslaved and freed James Roberts, what we do know is that the Colson family was freed by the Nelson family, the white Nelsons. And the Nelson family is connected to the Harrisons. And the Harrison family is connected to the Byrds. It's all connected. In these wills, they would bequeath to their children their plantation and whatever was on that plantation. And many times, more often than not, it was enslaved people. And in this case, enslaved American Indians. So we can assume that the Nelsons received some enslaved American Indians from their fathers, from the Harrisons, from the Byrds. And we know what happens on these plantations: reproduction. So we know that if the Colson family came from the Nelson plantation, we know that they held American Indian ancestry. Okay. And then you have Joseph Jenkins Roberts' mother-in-law, who was known as Jane Minor or Jency Snow. She was freed by, get ready, Benjamin Harrison May. Again, there goes that Harrison family name. She was freed because she was a nurse and she was good with medicine and she knew the medicinal plants of the land. With the money that she made, she freed many other American Indians or Black Americans who were living in Virginia at that time. She knew ways of curing people that the European colonists were not familiar with. She would use sassafras, sage, and many other natural plants found in the Virginia area to cure her patients. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of Joseph Jenkins Roberts' rise to president. And that lies in his father's company, James Roberts. James Roberts ran a shipping business. Like I mentioned earlier, this company was called Roberts, Colson and Company. So before I go into who and what the company was, I want to cover something very important. American Indians were supposed to be a non-tax population. Well, James Roberts, the father of Joseph Jenkins Roberts, and the Colson family were non-tax. And it reads, men like William Colson, James Roberts, and his 4 sons did not fit any of these rough molds. Samuel Pennington describes Roberts as a decent, honest man, not just in business, but in all convenience. So before Colson's sons joined Joseph in his business, Colson was a successful barber. Just like his father, James Colson, he enslaved 1 person and employed 3 Negro teenagers in his shop. Apparently, the Europeans in the Virginia colony did not require the Roberts and Colson families to register because they considered them to be a step above the unskilled Negroes who were forced to register with the county clerk. Colson, Roberts, and countless others ignored the registration laws and restrictions on out-of-state travel because the local community, the social and racial circle in which they lived, allowed them to do so. In the eyes of the nation, they were non-citizens, aliens at best, free slaves at worst. But on the ground, in the eyes of the people whom they shared lived experiences, they were known and established. This is very telling of their American Indian ancestry. They were being treated as outsiders, as people who were above the Virginia law because they were seen as intelligent and capable. They knew the land, they knew what products to sell, they knew where to ship, and they knew how to conduct business. So what was that business? Let's read this excerpt. Colson formed a commercial partnership before or during 1829 with other local free blacks, including Joseph Jenkins Roberts. The firm of Roberts, Colson and Company acquired a schooner, the Caroline, and began to trade between Liberia and the United States. Roberts moved to Liberia to head the partnership's African base of operations, and Colson initially remained in Virginia to manage the American side of the business. Roberts, Colson and Company became an important commercial connection between the United States and Liberia, but because no company ledgers have survived, its financial success cannot be measured. How unfortunate. The company's few existing records indicate that its American clients included several large partnerships in New York and Philadelphia. From Liberia, the company shipped to the United States such items as camwood for cabinet making, ivory, and palm oil, and it sent a variety of merchandise to Liberia, including cider, clothing, metal implements, wine, and such fancy goods as feather fans and silks. In 1835, the company purchased a second vessel, the schooner Margaret Mercer. Colson lived a more prosperous life than most other free blacks in 19th century Virginia. For example, in July 1835, he paid a total of $191 for a half year of his daughter's education and to cover his wife's traveling expenses. When his estate was inventoried after his death, the contents of his house and shop were valued at almost $300. In addition, he owned a half interest in the modest contents of a barbershop in Petersburg and a part of Roberts, Colson and Company. Colson's library included books on biography, history, poetry, religion, and he was probably self-educated. He was a careful man of business and he kept a very detailed record. The inventory of the wardrobe that he took on his voyage to West Africa in 1835 suggests his economic status and indication of himself as a successful professional man. It lists new linen and fine cotton shirts, several silk vests, silk handkerchiefs, 4 pair of kids' gloves, 250 Spanish cigars, and more than 25 religious books. Colson's death led to the dissolution of one of the first African-American transatlantic shipping companies, but his partner remained in Liberia and in 1848 became the first president of the new independent republic. Joseph Jenkins Roberts, y'all. So Joseph Jenkins Roberts becomes president of Liberia, and his mother wasn't actually too excited to move to Liberia, believe it or not. One could argue that she felt forced. Amelia Roberts, Joseph Jenkins Roberts' mother, was quoted saying this. When asked by her white friends why did she want to go to Liberia, they said to her, "Miss Roberts, why do you want to go to that far country? Can you not end your days here in comfort?" She replied, "I know I might end my days here in comfort, but I go for the sake of my children. If they remain here, they will never be freemen." So she was aware that the white population would re-enslave anybody, these American Indians, these mulattoes, these Africans. It was a very aggressive climate. So clearly there's ample evidence showing that many of the American Indians, many of the Black Americans that left to Liberia were in fact of American Indian ancestry. Whether they had a parent or grandparent, it was clear that many of them were American Indians. And eventually these American Indians and enslaved people were sold down south, downriver as we call it. Why is it not being told? It's time we take a deeper dive and look at ourselves and grasp and get a better understanding of what happened to our people. We can't know the whole story if we're fixated on one part of ourselves. We are more than just a Hollywood narrative. Why are we not looking at this documentation if it's there? Why are we ignoring it? Because a DNA test told you that your entire ancestry comes from Nigeria? I love Nigeria, but you know that's not what your grandparents told you. With that said, let's stop with this narrative that we are wholly from Africa when the American history does not start there. The Black American history, the Black American story does not start in Africa, and it never did. It starts right here in the United States of America.